Well, hello, New Orleans, and welcome, and everybody else. I mean, we're not just New Orleans, and we know there are other people watching around probably the country, as far as our metrics say. Jeff Duncan here with me on the Dattitude Podcast, episode number 111. We are live every Friday. We are live again here. We'll be live again Monday as the Saints take on the Baltimore Ravens Monday night, so you have plenty of time to think about that. This show is going to be kind of a little bit different than we normally do. It's not going to be all Saints. We're going to talk about LSU and Bama playing this weekend. We're going to talk about the Pelicans coming up. Tulane is taking on Tulsa on the road. Number 19, Tulane. Who would have thunk it? And so we got a lot to talk about. And I know Jeff and I both have some predictions on some of the big games that are happening this weekend. So this is going to be a little bit different. But Dunk, how you doing this morning? First off.
Man, I got my big pot of coffee brewed. I'm on my second major cup. I'm finishing my column on, and we never even talked about this, but I'm finishing my column, UNO football. Could that happen?
They've been talking about that since well before I attended UNO and LSU and all.
Vote comes down Tuesday, JD. I mean, Tuesday we're going to find out. I don't know if it's going to go through or not, but the day of reckoning is here, so it's kind of cool.
I already drank my coffee. I'm actually on to water. If I drink too much coffee, they won't be able to listen to me. Especially this morning.
I have to have coffee. I had a big meal last night. I went down to N7. I don't know if you've ever been down there.
No.
Awesome place. And right now, I think you agree, native New Orleanian. I mean, the weather, you've got to get out and enjoy it. And we ate outside. It was freaking amazing. So it was a great night to be out.
You can eat outside in New Orleans about 5 to 6 weeks a year. So definitely go out and enjoy it because we don't really have much of a fall. We go from for those of you not from New Orleans and just joining in, we go usually from summer into winter. And of course, what we think is winter is not winter. You've adapted now from being from Louisville. I mean, you're a New Orleanian now. I mean, to you, 50 is cold now.
Yeah, I got thin blood, man. I can't handle it. I cannot. When we were over in London, it was in the low 50s. I was dying. I was complaining the entire time.
And you'll be complaining here because we'll be pretty chilly soon enough. But we don't want to talk about the weather. I mean, we want to talk about the news of the day. And I'm gonna tone it down a little bit from my monologue because I know, Mr. Duncan, you are not usually as strong or as negative on certain things as I can be. And I was pretty harsh in my monologue. And for those of you watching the show live, when we're done, I put Dattitude on every podcast platform. I add my monologue to it. And so there are things that you will hear in the regular podcast that you won't hear here on this live show. And I got to say, I was pretty harsh on the $100 million man. That is MIA again. And that is Michael Thomas. And so my question, and I'm going to pose it to you again as nicely as possible about Michael Thomas, who now we find out, shocker, he's going to miss the rest of the season, most likely. But my take on this, Dunk, is it's one of three things. I said one of two things on the Bayou Bet show yesterday. I think it's one of three things when it comes down to Michael Thomas's toe injury and him missing the season. It's either the Saints medical staff is completely inept. And it could be all three of these things, by the way. It might not be just one, but it's at least one of these three things. Either the Saints medical staff is completely inept, either he has completely disregarded the medical advice that he's been given, or it's that, let me say, he's heartless. And that's the nice way to put it. Which one or multiple ones of those things is it?
Well, obviously it's a bad situation. There's no way to beat around the bush on that. It's bad for everybody involved. I saw the word heartless used a few times on social media yesterday by fans. I don't know the answer. I'll be honest with you. I've done some digging trying to find out. It's difficult to get much info or intel on the situation, I think, because first of all, it's somebody's private health
for sure
situation. So nobody likes to talk about that.
That's right.
Laws in place for that. So it's difficult to determine exactly what went wrong. My educated opinion is it's very similar to what happened last time Mike Thomas had his ankle injury, and he wanted to take a conservative approach, which involved rehab and therapy, not surgery. There were two different avenues you could take. He chose the one he did not want to get operated on. I understand that. Most people don't want to get cut open. But the recommendation from the Saints in his first injury, which we now know created some problems internally, was to take surgery and to get back as quickly as possible. He elected for a little more long-term conservative approach. It didn't get out and created a problem. I don't know that for a fact in this instance, but it sounds similar to me. I know he was getting a ton of work done, a ton of therapy and treatment. No one I've talked to, JD, has said anything other than the guy's devastated and very disappointed, and also put in a ton of work to get back. So clearly something went wrong, and I don't know what it was. I have to confess I was not at Dennis Allen's press conference yesterday, so I didn't have a chance to ask him these questions. So hopefully I can find out more, ferret out some more information in the future. But I totally understand the frustration from Saints fans because there's been so much mystery surrounding the way his treatment is being applied. It's led to a lot of, I think, false hope. And that obviously led to the disappointment yesterday and the outrage from so many people.
We are taking comments and questions this morning, whether you just have a general comment and feel the way that I do, or are a little less strong on it, or you're backing Michael Thomas, whatever it is. We'll take them here on Dattitude. You can leave it in the comment stream, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. If you're watching on Twitter, you can ask me at Jim Derry Jr., and I'll read the question on the air. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook and you want to ask a question, we'll show the question on the air. Like Uncle Big Nick, does anyone have the stats after the well, it's funny you asked that because I actually have that up here. And it's very interesting. The first 4 seasons of his career, how many games did Michael Thomas miss? First 4 seasons. You know the answer to that?
I don't know. I mean, I know he played. I thought he played pretty regularly early in his career.
4 seasons. He missed 1 game. 1 game he missed 4 seasons. The last 3 seasons, he's played a total of 10 games. And I was surprised. I got to be honest, I was surprised it was that many. He didn't play any of 2021. He played 7 games in 2020. He had 40 catches for 438 yards, 0 touchdowns. After scoring, 27-5, 32 touchdowns his first 4 seasons. He's had 3 since then. And the sad part is I really thought that when he came back this season and he came in and played, I thought he was a different player. I really thought he did look different. And, everyone wants to get excited about how he was rah-rah last week, or I don't know if that was last week. I think it was last week.
Yeah.
On the sideline. I mean, but, that doesn't do anything for me. I mean, at some point you talk about his contract, and here's the biggest problem with it all, Duncan. The cap hit for this year, it's a manageable $13 million. I mean, and he's making $15.8 million this year in total, including his bonus and restructured portion of it and all that. Here's the big problem. You can't do anything with him. People talk about trading him. No one's going to take him unless you eat a big chunk of his salary cap hit. $28.2 million salary cap hit next year. The following year is $27.5 million salary. You are stuck. The Saints are stuck, and they're already in a precarious situation, Dunk, where they're not going to be able to sign any big free agents because they're not going to have the cap room. People talk about quarterback and what they're going to do. They're not going to have options unless they draft one and get lucky and draft one that can come in and play almost right away. But really, I don't see any answers for this team coming up in the future. The future is not bright as far as getting players to want to come here.
Right. And so, let me just address that earlier stat you brought up. I mean, you can understand. I know Mickey Loomis and Kai Harley, they put in a ton of research on players before they hand out a second contract, before they, make that investment in a player. And part of that evaluation that they make is on a player's durability and availability. I know they consider that heavily. So you can understand why they gave him a 5-year, $96 million contract. He'd only missed 1 game at the time. It's just unfortunate. There's nothing I can see to blame the Saints for giving him that contract. But how it's played out since then, there's a lot of blame to go around. how it's been handled, his health and medical situation. I know this about him. He does not follow most players' approach to treatment. He's very much his own guy. There's a lot of players like that. It should be made clear. There's a lot of players like that, not just in the NFL. I mean, I think of like Barry Bonds. I'm a huge Giants fan. Barry Bonds had his own personal trainer, his own doctors he dealt with, and the Giants put up with it because he was Barry Bonds, right? He produced. And to a lesser degree, that's Mike Thomas. The guy's a phenomenal player when he's healthy. There's no doubt about it. And the Saints have been willing to let him do his thing to make him happy and to hopefully get him back on the field. It just hasn't worked out, but he definitely takes a different approach to these injuries, and he's not the normal player. And so I think that's contributed to these kind of lingering injuries that have caused, they've caused people, I think, to get hope up that he's going to come back. It's a complicated situation. I don't know if the team has handled it the way they'd like to handle it, but they're trying to make the best of this kind of awkward situation.
Jim Derry with Jeff Duncan here, as we do every Friday morning at 9:15. And it's a weird Friday because the Saints aren't playing until Monday. So, again, we're going to have another live show on Monday where we'll be talking more about the actual matchup. We will talk about it a little bit here, but we're going to save our predictions for Monday, although it's in my NFL picks column if you can't wait that long. But I have another question from my friend Paul Haley, who asked, if we, meaning the Saints, ate the guaranteed money, roughly $25 million, would anyone want him for his base salary of $15 million next year and $18 million the following? And before I let you answer that, I think part of the problem is, even if the Saints were to cut him and someone were to pick him up, the problem is they don't necessarily have to sign up for that salary. The Saints are on the hook for that money unless they find someone that is willing to at least take on part of the cap hit, which is not likely. So, I mean, that presents a problem in itself.
Yeah, I don't think internally, at least the people I've talked to, I don't sense that they're wanting to move on from Mike Thomas. I haven't had any of that. Now, that can change, JD, if the season goes south and you're looking at maybe a complete makeover, right? You're going to blow up the roster. You're going to start a full-blown rebuilding job. That's not the way Mickey Loomis operates. I mean, they've wanted to be relevant and in contention all along. That's why they keep doing these salary cap gymnastics to try and stay competitive. But the reality might hit them soon. I mean, the future is looking pretty bleak with the salary cap situation. The fact is, I think we can safely say at this point midseason that they misjudged some of the roster and they misjudged how good this team was going to be. Now, they could still maybe rally.
So did we.
Yeah, they could get back in it, but there's no question they thought they were going to be better than they are. And so that can have consequences in terms of how you manage going forward. And I think part of that evaluation has to include Mike Thomas. I don't think they can move on from him. I think you've got to get what you can out of him. And that's really the issue. We talked about when they give a big contract like this, when you pay a guy basically $20 million a year, you're expecting massive production. And everything he'd done his first year after getting that contract, he set an NFL record for receptions. So he delivered and then some on that contract. But since then, they've had $20 million of their cap devoted to him, and they've gotten really nothing out of it. And then when you throw in a guy like Marshawn Lattimore, who's out with this kind of fluke injury, you've got another second contract, major dollars, significant portion of your salary cap where you're getting nothing out of these two major keystones to your team. It's devastating when that happens.
Again, I'm going to talk. I have talked, and it just hasn't been published yet as we speak right here, that more about this and what I think about it. And so if you want to get more of my take, although I'm pretty sure you can read between the lines and what I'm saying, on my monologue, wherever you find your podcast, Dattitude, my monologue is added to that show every Friday. It will come out about an hour after this show ends, which will be somewhere around the 10 a.m. hour. Jeff Duncan and I are talking about Saints, Ravens, and along with we will talk about LSU, Alabama, Tulane, Tulsa, and the Pelicans at some point. I want to talk about some of the other injuries. Duncan, you touched on Marshawn Lattimore. Do we have any idea what's going on with him, and what's the prognosis of when we think that he may be available again, if at all, this season?
No, I mean, that's another one they've been keeping on the down low. I've heard he injured his kidney when he took that fall in the end zone, and that's not good. And it's been difficult for him to get back in his core, to get back on the field. I think the encouraging part of that is that Alante Taylor has really stepped up in his
Yes,
attitude.
he has.
The rookie looks like a real find in the second round. I love his fearlessness. I love his competitiveness. So I think they kind of can weather the storm with those two guys. They can't get Adebo or Taylor hurt because Bradley Roby's on IR. They need to be able to keep those guys up healthy. PJ Williams is back practicing. That's a big return. I know, he doesn't excite a lot of people, but he's a valuable player on their back end. And look, they're playing the Ravens this week, who present a big-time challenge, but not necessarily at wide receiver in the passing game. So,
they're missing Rashad Bateman as well.
Right, so. And Bateman's out. So this is a week where I think you can survive not having Lattimore. Now, Jarvis Landry practiced yesterday. I don't know if that's good or bad news in that how he ended practice. I heard there was a lot of training staff around him. I think yesterday, from what I understood, was going to be his day to get out there and test it. Now, we'll see how he comes out of that today. I'd heard earlier in the week they were really excited about him. He was excited about getting back, but they knew that this practice yesterday was going to be kind of a litmus test for him. We'll see how he comes out of it. I heard he didn't, he was disappointed. So we'll see if he goes forward. Obviously, with Thomas news, you want to get Landry back on the field as soon as possible as well.
Andrus Peat came back. It was good to see him back on the field. The Saints O-line is, knock on wood, because we know how things go, but the Saints O-line maybe is as healthy as it has been since week one of the season. And to me, Dunk, that is going to be super important in this game because Andy Dalton has to have time. I mean, Zach Ewing threw up a stat, or at least in our text feed the other day, about how Andy Dalton, when he has time to throw, when he has a clean pocket, he is one of the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks in the league. That's not to say whether he's going to have a clean pocket or not. But they're going to have time to throw because I think, unlike last week, this week against the Ravens, and we'll put the graphic on the screen, but the Ravens, you see there, they're 5th in rushing defense, 28th in passing defense. And so obviously for the Saints this week, Dunk, they're going to have to be able to throw the ball. It's not going to be just the kind of Kamara, Taysom pounding attack like they were successful with last week and against Seattle. They're going to have to be able to throw the ball. I think Andy Dalton needs to throw for 300 yards this week for the Saints to win.
Well, I think they're going to have to try and run it. I mean, that's their bread and butter.
Well, of course.
They're definitely going to. That's how this offense works. Is they're able to be successful running the ball, and then you use the pass to kind of move the chains. They want to be in. I think the key to last week's game that people sometimes don't realize offensively was they were really good on first down. First and second down. Andy Dalton wasn't in these 3rd and 12s and 3rd and 9s very often. So they were manageable. He could dump it off to Alvin Kamara, and they could get those first downs. And so that, I think, is the recipe for success. I don't see them just dropping back and throwing a lot. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. But and look, I could be wrong. I thought the Raiders game was going to be kind of a shootout, and it was completely opposite of what I thought. Sometimes these games take on a life of their own. But I see this game being in the 20s. I think it's going to be close, competitive, a lot of field goals. You got, great field goal kicker for Baltimore, obviously one of the best of all time. And Will Lutz certainly is capable, but he's had a down year this year. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. I mean, he's one of the lowest in the league on percentage basis right now, but you still have confidence in him. And I feel like defensively, if we see the Saints play with that same energy and enthusiasm that they had against the Raiders, that's what stood out to me. It wasn't scheme. It wasn't X's and O's. It was just their effort and their running to the ball and their, the body language. You could just see it from the beginning. I texted a friend of mine who's a big Raiders fan after the first play, JD, and I said, and he was in the stands. I said, "You're getting the Saints A game today." You could just see it. I mean, they came to play. Now, can they replicate it? That's what it's going to take, because when you got a guy like Lamar Jackson, I mean, you've got to run to the ball. Everybody's got to pursue, because the guy's so dynamic. All it takes is one cut, and he's going to take it to the house, and everybody's got to be getting after it. And I think they can be successful if they do that.
Yeah, I don't know where I read this or heard this somewhere this week when I was going through all my analysis. It's all a blur at this point because I spent basically 2 full days going through every game and trying to pick our winners, and hence why you and I have both been pretty good with picking winners this year. But someone said the Saints are the reason why they like the Saints, and a lot of the sharps are on the Saints, by the way. And the reason why is because the Saints are good against running quarterbacks. And I'm like, I don't know where they got that from, because that is not true, at least not as of late. The Saints against, let's call them dual threat quarterbacks. So they're not all rushing quarterbacks. If you take the top 10 rushing quarterbacks right now this season and the Saints' record against them from the start of the 2021 season, the Saints are 1-4 against those quarterbacks. And that one win is a fluky, got to be honest, lucky win against the Atlanta Falcons in week 1 because Marcus Mariota is in that top 10. So the Saints do not fare well against running quarterbacks. And Lamar Jackson, we could sit here and debate whatever you want, but Lamar Jackson is by far the best of all the dual threat quarterbacks.
Yeah, he's the best running quarterback I think the league has seen since Mike Vick. And
of course, you're biased, though. Well, I just got to throw that bias out there because
I know, I am, but I have to say I've never really seen.
But he is.
Run the ball like
neither have I.
Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's like something on a Madden cheat code, right? I mean, he's different, and they built the whole offense around his skill set, which is smart coaching. I think more than anything, I have respect for John Harbaugh and that staff. I mean, I don't know what happened with the Raiders on Sunday. I mean, every once in a while, Jim, a team just lays an egg and doesn't show up, and that was the Raiders. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from the Saints, but the Raiders look out of it. They looked lifeless. I don't know what that fake.
They had a lot of illness issues throughout the week.
They just didn't look into it, and the fake punt was just a disastrous sequence there where the Saints got a 10-0 lead, almost gifted to them after that bad decision, and they got control of the game. We talk about it on this podcast every week. Getting control of the game is so important. Everything changes when you get a 2-score lead. You can manage the game differently. Andy Dalton can check it down. He doesn't have to force things, and I think he's playing really well right now. He's playing exactly the way the Saints want him to. But this game, I think, Monday night is going to be a physical game. And you talked earlier about the offensive line. I thought they played great against the Raiders. And the defensive line played as well as we've seen them play this season. They finally look like the group that we thought we'd see at the beginning of the year. That's going to have to come and replicate itself Monday night because the Ravens are physical up front. And it's going to be like a classic AFC North slugfest. And the Saints are good in those kind of games, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as easy as it was against the Raiders.
I kind of think it's going to be high scoring, actually.
It could be.
I think they're going to kind of go back and forth with one another. I think it's going to be a fun game to watch. I would be, Zach put the Saints in a teaser this week. And for those of you who aren't familiar with betting or don't know what a teaser is, basically it's like a parlay. You bet 2 teams and you have to win both of them, but you get a gifted 6 points in the line, whatever it is. So in this case, if you put the Saints in a teaser, you'd be getting the Saints plus 8.5. And frankly, I don't think either team is going to win by more than 8 points. I think it's going to be a tight game throughout. Again, I'm not giving my prediction yet. We're going to save that for Monday, but I do think it's going to be a tight game. I think it's going to be a fun game. The Ravens were kind of in a slugfest last week with Tampa Bay. I thought it was interesting to see how John Harbaugh came out with the mentality in that game that they kind of got away from what they really do. In the first half, they decided they were going to throw the ball against Tampa. I'm not sure why they decided to do that, but it clearly didn't work. They were trailing at halftime, and they made great adjustments. And no surprise, Todd Bowles didn't make any adjustments at halftime, and the Ravens clearly were much better coached. And the Ravens went on to win, and they put the game on the feet of Lamar Jackson. And I think you're going to see that this week. I think you're going to see that from the jump because even if Gus Edwards, who is their lead back at the moment, because that J.K. Dobbins is on IR, even if he's back, he's going to be limited. So Lamar Jackson's going to have to run the ball 15, 18 times. And so do you put a spy on him? I'm not sure, but if the Saints line defensive front plays like they did last week, I think they will be able to contain him a little bit.
Yeah, I think the key with that is keeping Pete Werner and DeMario
100%.
keeping those guys free so they can pursue the ball. I mean, Pete Werner's playing great right now, and Demario Davis has really come on. I think their linebacking core is, arguably the strength of the team this season. It's played very consistently. I saw where Pro Football Focus has Davis ranked as the highest graded linebacker in the league so far. I think that would surprise Saints fans. Pete Werner certainly is had an incredible sophomore year. Those guys got to be free, making a lot of tackles on the run, and then you got to pursue Lamar Jackson. Everybody's got to run to the ball. That was something when I noticed on game tape when I'd review the games, the Saints weren't running to the ball. I mean, they just weren't showing the effort needed at this level, and they did against the Raiders. They got to bring it again. I think they will. I mean, that's going to be a great atmosphere. It's the first primetime game in the Dome this year. I think Saints fans will show out, and I think if they can get Lamar into some obvious passing situations, they can force some turnovers. He'll put the ball into coverage.
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah, he will definitely put it into coverage, and I think they can take advantage of that, and that could lead to what you're talking about, a higher scoring game. I always try to take into consideration turnovers because that always leads to points. I mean, it's usually short fields or pick sixes, and that could happen certainly this week.
A couple of things. We're about to move on. We've got about 16, 17 minutes left in the show. And again, I do want to talk about LSU. I want to talk about Tulane. I want to talk about the Pelicans. So that's a tight window to fit those in. And then also want to just touch on Tennessee, Georgia this weekend. But lastly, on the Saints going back, I got a couple comments and just want to put them up here. Donnie writes that Michael Thomas broke almost every receiving record in the NFL the year after he signed that contract. Well, that's true, but that doesn't change anything. I mean, the fact is the last 3 years he's been a no-show. And the big problem is here now, even for me. I got to be honest. I'm not sure that we ever see him play again. I mean, he's about to turn 30 years old. And I've been saying it since he first went out. I don't understand why they didn't put him on IR. They gave some false hope that he was coming back, but you can't believe that he was going to come back. And so now you wonder if he's ever going to come back. And I mean, the Saints are on the hook for that. We'll find out. I mean, I'm not ready to say that he's not ever going to come back, but I think that it's certainly a possibility. Ryan asked, he's starting to think the turf may be contributing to all these injuries. Jarvis and James's ankle injury that we just found out. I don't see the other team getting hurt on this turf.
Well, no. Now, this is what he's talking about. I think maybe Carolina, and that was an issue. That's where Mike Thomas got hurt. And that's been an issue around the league with that surface in Carolina. I remember when Mike Thomas got hurt. I remember looking through my binoculars as he came off the field, and he'd just run a route, and he came off the field, and he was talking to the trainers on the sideline, talking about how he made this move, and his foot kind of, got caught. But it just seemed minor at the time. And here we are talking about a season-ending injury. And I think the frustration – and it's totally justifiable from fans, is not that he's hurt. It's how they've handled things when he's gotten hurt.
Zero doubt.
That's the problem. That's what people – it's justifiable because a lot of these things could have been handled much quicker, or the rehab process would have accelerated if he'd just be willing to get operated on. And I just think that's been a big issue. And at some point, the organization needs to address it publicly because I understand why fans don't trust what they're hearing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as much the organization as it is Michael Thomas. I mean, and I probably a little bit harder on Michael Thomas than I am on the Saints, but they have handled this poorly, and that's putting it nicely. So, I mean, I'm not taking anything away from how the organization, and it really could be. I mean, we've seen it happen with Zion. Dunk, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, it's the same organization, basically, the same medical staff. And what's happened with Zion? He's finally back after 2 years. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on, but that's going to come up at some point. Before we move on, I do want to talk about the schedule and see what kind of spot this fits in. Obviously, we know what the Saints have done the last 2 weeks, and last week getting that win, and not just the win, the dominant win, to give them a feeling of confidence and that they can play like that. And if you look at this, Dunk, they really have an opportunity here. If they can get back to 4-5 this week and then go to Pittsburgh, the Saints are already opened as a 2.5-point favorite. And if the Saints beat the Ravens on Monday night, that's going to go up. I mean, they're going to be 3 or 3.5-point favorites in Pittsburgh. Mike Tomlin teams play hard. You don't take anything for granted. But the Rams aren't what the Rams were. So, I mean, the Saints really have a chance here, Dunk, to make something of this season, something I never would have thought we'd say just, 14 days ago.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think this game's huge on Monday night. The Saints can win it. It really sets them up, I think, momentum-wise, to make a run. And that's what you have to do when you get down 2-5 to start. You got to make a run. But, look, I've heard internally talking to people that Dennis Allen's told people this is the best team they will have played all year. This is going to be the biggest challenge they've had.
Except San Francisco.
The Vikings, who are what, 6-1, 7-1? So
I think Frisco and Philadelphia are probably the two best teams they'll play. But I see so what he's saying.
He's talking about so far, yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is a big challenge. If they can get a win there, and you hope that home field advantage kind of carries you in a tight game, you're right. The schedule certainly becomes a little more user-friendly. You hope you get Lattimore and Landry back at some point, if not this week, down the road, and you can make a run. I just was encouraged by the intangibles of that game the other night, the effort, the body language, and the play of both lines, which we thought were going to be the strength of this team, and it hadn't been the case early on. Now, if that carries over, I like their chances in just about anybody they play.
Again, we will have our predictions on our Monday live show. That's right. Monday morning at 9:15, Duncan and I will be live again. We'll both be in the Dome. And, in fact, Zach Ewing and I are going to do our Bayou Bet show. I believe we're going to do it from the Dome. I'm not 100% sure. We're going to have to figure that out. But that show is 4 o'clock on Monday. We'll be live at 9:15 to talk about it. And I will get post-game reaction, and I'll have a special Dattitude on Tuesday as well. That will be wherever you find your podcast. That's where Dattitude will be. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit. There are other things going on around this area, we know. And one of them here is Alabama and LSU. And it is an interesting matchup. First off, regardless of what we think might happen on Saturday, I think you're a hater or you're blind if you don't think that LSU has completely outperformed what anyone thought they would do to this point in the season. If you'd have told me, especially after the Florida State game, but even before, if you'd have told me that that LSU would be going into the Alabama game ranked 15th and have 6 wins already, I would have told you were out of your box. Yeah,
no, I'm with you. I think it's a credit to the coaching job that Brian Kelly and his staff have done. They figured out what buttons to push. It's natural, right? You got a new staff, a whole new roster. There's a feeling out process that goes into that. Figure out what the strengths and weaknesses are of your personnel. And you're right. I mean, that opening game, I didn't think was nearly as bad as LSU fans were reacting to it. I know they were disappointed. But what also stood out to me was they lost Mason Smith in that game. I mean, he's their best player. He's a first-round draft pick, a high first-round draft pick. So that was discouraging. But they've really put things together. They're playing with confidence. Jaden Daniels looks like a different guy now. I think that is a credit to him. And I think this game is going to be unbelievable on Saturday. I mean, the first real big, home game. I know they played Tennessee, but it's an afternoon game. The first big home SEC night game in a few years because the Tigers just haven't been very competitive of late. So this game's going to, I think, have all the makings of a classic. I think it's going to be I may be swimming upstream on this one, JD, but I think it's going to be low scoring. I've covered a bunch of these Alabama LSU games. They know each other well. And they tend to be physical defensive battles. I know there's been a little more higher scoring games the last couple of years, but I feel like that's because LSU's defense hasn't been up to its standards. I think the defense is playing well. I think they'll play well. So I think this game will be closer than that point margin with one caveat, and that is Jaden Daniels got to avoid mistakes because he's going to face a defensive challenge that he hasn't really seen this year. The way Alabama disguises their coverages, they do a lot of disguise work pre-snap, and they're going to give him some problems, I think. And if he can avoid mistakes, which he's done lately, I think this game will be close.
Well, he's definitely going to have to avoid mistakes, but regardless of what happens, and I've said this 100 times, but the transformation of Jaden Daniels from game 1 to game number 8 and how he has progressed is amazing. I think that's has a lot to do with the coaching staff and what they've been able to do. And I think, the Brian Kelly haters have kind of disappeared. They may reappear if it doesn't go the Tigers' way this week. but just the coaching staff and what they've been able to do. And I look forward to seeing what Jaden Daniels can do. You think back to Joe Burrow and the progression that first year, he didn't look like what he turned out to be. I mean, it's amazing to see from Joe Burrow from the first game of his junior season to the national championship game, a completely different player. And I'm not saying Jaden Daniels is going to be Joe Burrow, but already the improvement I've seen has been absolutely immense.
Yeah, look, and I think the LSU defense, I mean, let's not forget, I mean, there's some studs over there. They got some first-round draft picks. They got some 5-star recruits, a bunch of 4- and 5-star recruits over there. They're talented, and this isn't the same like Alabama receiving core we've seen in the past. They've had to make hay with Bryce Young, the running game. They still have a very good offensive line, but I think LSU's defense is playing with confidence. I think they're going to keep this thing close. I don't know if they can win the game or not, but I think they're going to give Alabama everything they've got now. Alabama, I think, will look at this game as a chance now to kind of reestablish their bona fides with the selection committee or the college football playoff committee. That loss was gut-wrenching for them in Tennessee, and they're going to the Saints. LSU is going to get their A game. There's no question Alabama's going to come to play.
Uncle Big Dick brought up a good point on yesterday's Dattitude where we make our predictions every week. And, I think it's true. I think, you look at the opening playoff odds or rankings or whatever they are, and they put LSU at 10th. And I think that, they can manipulate that any way they want. And I think that's manipulated to make both Alabama and Tennessee, their resume, look better because no one expects LSU to win this game. I mean, no one who's realistic about this. I mean, LSU is only a 13.5-point dog, but I mean, it would be one of the shocks of the season if LSU were to win this game. Tennessee beating Alabama, that's one thing. They showed why they're one of the best teams in the country. But if you look back on the way LSU played against Tennessee, I mean, so the fact that LSU is number 10, they don't belong that high, and it is going to strengthen the resume of Alabama and Tennessee. That being said, LSU has a serious opportunity to get themselves back. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, I mean, they can win the SEC West if they win this game.
I know.
And actually probably are the favorites to win the SEC West if they win this game. So, I mean, they put themselves in legitimate contention to be in the playoffs if they win.
Yeah, and look, Brian Kelly took this job to coach in games like this. I mean, this is why he came here.
That's right.
I mean, he left Notre Dame, one of the, traditionally great programs in college football history. So he came here to be able to win a national title and to match wits with guys like Nick Saban. And what I've always said is, you've got to have great coaching in the SEC, especially in the SEC West, because Nick Saban, everything's going to even out as far as athleticism and talent on the playing field. Then it comes down to what's your staff doing with what the resources they have. And in the past, LSU has not been able to match Saban and his staff. I mean, they've had the same level of talent for the most part. Look at the NFL. I think three programs with the most players in the NFL are LSU and Alabama. So it hasn't been a talent problem. It's been a matching wits with maybe the greatest coach in college football history and his staff. And they have an army of analysts. LSU's finally gotten up, I think, resource-wise to match them. Now they've got to get brain power-wise to match them. And I think they've got that now with Brian Kelly. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. This roster was too far down to expect them to do it. But what I've seen so far, I've been really impressed with Brian Kelly. And that's why Scott Woodward hired him. He hired a CEO, a guy that can hire really good young assistants, motivate them. And we're seeing it all take place and manifest itself right now with this program.
About 7 to 10 minutes left in the live portion of the show. If you want to jump in and get your comment or a question, and it could be on anything. It could be the Saints will answer it, even though we've switched topics here. Be glad to answer it. If you want to give a prediction, that's fine. But again, we're going to have a Monday show. You want to give a prediction on Alabama, LSU, or you want to ask about the Pelicans? This is pretty much your last chance. Again, about 7 to 10 minutes left. Before we move on and just touch on Tulane, Tulsa. I do want to get your prediction. I think I've already heard it. The LSU Tigers, as I speak, are 13.5-point underdogs. The over/under is 56.5. I agree with you that it's going to be a lower scoring game. I think it is. I think the under is a good bet on there, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But your game prediction?
Yeah, I think it'll be something like, 24-20 Alabama. I think this goes down to the fourth quarter. Alabama kind of grinds it out. If you look at some of their other games this year, very similar type of games, Texas A&M, they've been kind of low-scoring defensive slugfests. I think that's what's going to happen again here. But I think LSU's got a puncher's chance in this game. I really do. I think if they could get on top early somehow, and I would love to see Brian Kelly, his staff, pull some kind of trick play to manufacture some points, get the crowd into it. I think they could pull this thing off. I don't think it will happen. I wouldn't bet it that way, but I definitely give LSU a chance to win this game. And if they do that, JD, it's going to be nuts in Baton Rouge Saturday night.
LSU plus 400 on the money line. So if you think the Tigers are going to win, yeah, that's right. Plus 400, 4-1. So you can go and bet 4-1, or you put $10 on it, you win. I'm not telling you to do that, by the way. Not advocating you to do that. But if you were to do that, if you were to put $10 on LSU and they were to win, you would win $40 at Caesars Sportsbook, which is the official odds partner of bet.NOLA.com, by the way. All right. Uncle Big Nick says if LSU gets down early, like they have been, they have no shot. I couldn't agree with that anymore. Donnie says he hopes LSU isn't as conservative with their play calling. I don't think they've been conservative. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think they've been conservative at all. If you call running Jaden Daniels conservative, that's just part of their offense. I don't necessarily think that's conservative. That's just who they are. They're certainly going to try to get John Emery involved, and he is available for this game. So I don't think that's conservative. I don't agree with that. All right, Uncle Big Nick also says, does the rain help or hurt our LSU? Well, it's supposed to rain early. So the good news is the rain should be well over. It may be a wet turf. Oh, okay, Donnie, that makes sense. I'm sorry. He says in the past versus Bama, they have been conservative at times. Now, not in the national championship year, because Joe Burrow was that was the shootout between him and Tua, and that was one of the craziest games you'll ever see. All right, my prediction. I'm all over the place here I'm trying to get everything in. I hope you're right, Dunk. I hope it is tight. I do like the under, but the reason why I like the under is I'm thinking going back again to Joe Burrow's junior year, and we talk about the progression that he made from junior to senior year. I don't think Jaden Daniels is ready for this yet. As much as I've been tooting his horn and will toot his horn, no matter what he does in this game, because I think he's been fantastic. I just don't think I think he's going to be deer in the headlights for this one. I think he'll be ready for them next year when they play him in Tuscaloosa, but I don't think he's going to be ready for him this year. And honestly, I don't think that as well as the defense has played, I mean, I still think Bryce Young is the best college quarterback in the country. I mean, I really do. And so I think they're going to have a tough time with that. I think it's going to be kind of like that Joe Burrow junior year game. And I think LSU, I was there in Tiger Stadium that night when they lost 29-0. I'm not saying that LSU is going to get shut out, but I don't think they're going to score a whole lot either.
I agree with that. I think they'll struggle to score. And I agree with Big Nick. They don't need to get down 14-0 in the first quarter.
Then it's over.
Recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, they're not coming back from that. So LSU, if they have any chance at all, has to take the lead. And quite frankly, I think they need to be at least leading or tied at halftime. If the LSU is not leading or tied at halftime, they're not winning this football game. So, but anyway, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's going to be somewhere along the lines of 27-7. Hope I'm wrong. Hope LSU comes out and plays well. This is just not a good matchup for them. That being said, I do think after this game, I think they win the rest of their regular season games, and I think they're a much better team than Texas A&M or Arkansas, quite frankly. And to even be able to say that, because I wouldn't have said that 4 or 5 weeks ago,
right.
It's kind of amazing, and great job by Brian Kelly. All right, I do not have a graphic for Tulane Tulsa, Dunk, but Tulane ranked number 19 in the country. What a job by Willie Fritz, and the defense for this Tulane team has been outstanding. I do worry coming off of a bye week and going on the road. This is not the greatest of spots of them. We talked about their end of season schedule against Cincinnati and SMU, and I think they're going to play great in those games. Tulane a 7.5-point favorite going into Tulsa. If I had to bet it, and I won't, I would take Tulsa because I think it's going to be a really tight game, and this is clearly a spot where Tulane could be looking ahead and have a letdown.
100% agree with that. I mean, this is a dangerous, dangerous game. Your head's in the clouds. You had the big homecoming win against Memphis. Then you get a bye week. This is where Willie Fritz and his staff will be tested, and the leadership of the team to have them focused. But I do think one thing I like about this Tulane team is they have been kind of focused. They got a lot of guys on the team that played a lot of football. They got a lot of seniors and upperclassmen that get it. So I think Tulane will win the game, but I think Tulsa is a dangerous team. They played a lot of close games and lost. They've had kind of one of those years, kind of like Tulane had last year, where you lose a lot of close games and your record gets lopsided the other way. So I think this is a dangerous game, especially with Central Florida on the horizon in Ullman. Easy to look ahead there. So I'm sure Willie Fritz and his staff have hammered that home. And I think it comes down – I think Michael Pratt will have a big game against Tulsa, and this team will be able to edge it out. But I think what's the line, 7.5 points? That's
7.5. Yeah,
that's a lot to lay on the road. If I were betting, I'd be hesitant to lay those points.
Yeah, that just seems like a trap. So I wouldn't. Again, I'm not going to touch that game. Going back real quick, Uncle Big Nick asked 74% of the bets on the Saints. Are we surprised? I got to say yes.
Wow, that's a lot.
I would say the analyst that's sharp money, and I've heard nothing but sharps all week long. I mean, I listen to them. I don't necessarily, agree with them I'm not going to say whether I agree or not, but I try to help base my analysis on every game, basing a lot of what I hear from the 3 or 4 people that I trust, and all of them are on the Saints this week, and I don't agree. Not that I don't agree. I don't get it. I don't understand. I mean, I know that some people think it's a value. The Saints are 2.5-point dogs, but here's what I don't get. They were 1.5-point dogs to the Raiders, who I don't think are good at all. And they're only a 2.5-point dog to the Ravens, who I think are clearly, you take out Buffalo and Kansas City, and Baltimore is definitely the next team in the AFC, in my opinion.
Yeah, and look, I think in my history of looking at lines, one thing I've always been leery of is the 2 to 2.5 point line.
Yeah.
That always indicates.
Or the 3.5.
Yeah, the odds makers are trying to get you to go one way.
100%.
They're saying Ravens people, hey, look at that. All they got to do is win by a field goal. So
they're begging you to bet on the Ravens.
Yeah, they're trying to get you to bet on the Ravens. So that does indicate, I think, the Sharps' inclination to take the Saints there, a home dog. The Saints' record as a home dog the last few years has not been what it used to be. But I know in the Sean Payton year, I used to document it. They were almost like 100% winner. Yeah. Not only did they cover, they would win the game outright. Now, this is a different era and a different iteration of the Saints. But, historically, they've been good in that spot.
Yeah, I haven't done my trends column yet, and that's one of the things that I will look at. I think I saw somewhere where they have lost 4 in a row. They had lost 4 in a row against the spread at home before last week.
Struggled at home, man. They, until last week, I think they only won one of their last 8-9 games.
It's been not the usual Saints home performance for sure. I'll get into all that again every Sunday. It'll be Monday this week. Have a trends column, and not all of it is pertinent to whether we think how to pick a winner, but there's a lot of interesting things in there and showing you and I also get into the quarterbacks and how they fared against the other team. I will tell you this: Lamar Jackson has only rushed 3 times against the Saints, and he's only thrown 1 pass. He came in a backup. Not a backup. He came in a Taysom Hill type role when Joe Flacco was still the quarterback. And here's another thing that worries me, Dunk. Justin Tucker is going to have extra motivation in this game. He doesn't forget. Yeah. He doesn't forget. And 4 years ago, missing an extra point against the Saints, he's probably only missed 3 extra points in his whole life. And one of them was against the Saints that ended up costing them the game. So he's going to have extra motivation in this one.
Yeah, I'll never forget that game. I covered that game. That was shocking. Unbelievable game, comeback by the Ravens.
And I think he doinked the field goal as well.
Yeah, look, I think this game will be like that one, though. Tight.
I agree.
Physical. And every once in a while, you're right. The Ravens are a higher scoring team than people think. I mean, every once in a while they can drop Lamar back, and he's not an accurate passer, but, man, he can throw a haymaker. He can
zip it.
Yeah, he can throw a haymaker and get some big plays. They've got to defend the tight end this week. The Ravens.
Oh, and Mark Andrews, yeah, he's been questionable, but he's going to play in this game. and that's Lamar Jackson's security blanket. So there's no question they have to cover
and the
him.
rookie they've got, Isaiah Lively.
Yes,
he is picked. They're dangerous, and that's something really the Saints haven't seen a lot of. They were fortunate last week when Darren Waller was listed out for the game. A lot of people thought he might play. That helped a lot, but it's going to be a big challenge this week.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that on Monday for sure, because Isaiah Lively is another name. I mean, he was a lot of people picked him higher in fantasy than maybe people expected. But I will tell you this about the Ravens. I can tell you both Buffalo and Kansas City, they don't want to be on the side of the bracket of one another, but they don't want to be on the side of the bracket of Baltimore either, because they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs. For either one of those teams, I can promise you that. That is going to be interesting. All right. Before we end the show, we got to talk about the Pelicans. We don't have to, but we are going to talk about the Pelicans. What a heartbreaker on Wednesday night, Dunk. I don't know if you stayed up to watch all that or not. I did. And the poor kid, Dyson Daniels, missing those 2 free throws that would put away. Those are 2 free throws that will haunt him and haunt his team at some point if they're close to, there's a huge difference between 4 seed and 5 seed, and that's where we're thinking about where this Pelicans team could be. So if you miss that 4 seed and get that home court advantage later in the season, you're going to think back to November and think about 2 missed free throws and in a crazy 3-point shot by some guy named Matt Ryan, nonetheless.
I know. Look, I did not make it to the end. I have to confess, I watched till halftime. I was so tired. I had to go to sleep, and I got the next morning, watched all the replay on the League Pass, and that was a tough loss, man. But look, they got a huge game at the Smoothie King Center tonight. Defending champions coming to town. The Warriors, Steph Curry,
3-6.
Yeah, they've lost all 5 of their road games, 0-5, including to the 1-7 Orlando Magic last night. So, this is a team that is going to be motivated. They're going to be coming back home after this, so they're going to want to get a win and get back to the Bay Area. But I think the Smoothie King Center is going to be rocking tonight. The Pelicans are favored, I think 4-point favorites. And there is good news on that front. Sounds like they might be getting Herb Jones back. And
Brandon Ingram.
And Brandon Ingram. So this team, they'll be inspired after letting that one slip away against the Lakers. I think they're going to be amped for this game.
The Pelicans indeed are 4-point favorites, -180 on the money line, which that means Vegas has them at a 1.8 to 1 favorite to beat the Golden State Warriors tonight. And that's interesting because I don't think you would have saw that come before the season started. This team is playing very well. They're 4-3. And so you talk about, you make one of those free throws and you're 5-2. And with the tough schedule that they've opened with, it's quite impressive. And now they have a stretch where, they came off the road trip. They get to come home for one game and go back on the road, but at the Hawks and at the Pacers. And I know Atlanta's playing very well right now. I think that's decent matchups for all those games, really.
Well, what I want to see tonight against the Warriors is a little better defensive intensity. I think that in the end is going to be how this team either sinks or rises. I mean, how they play D, there were some momentary lapses against the Lakers that you just can't have in a game like that. I mean, that game should have been around the 100-point mark or 110. I know it went overtime, but they've got to play better defense tonight, especially against a team that can, let's face it, the greatest shooting team in the history of the NBA. So their perimeter defense will be tested. I think the depth of this team clearly is one of its strengths. I don't quite understand why Dyson Daniels was in the game the other night when he was. I know he's a good free throw shooter, statistically, but a 19-year-old kid in that situation, that might pay off for him down the road, getting tested that
100%.
But man, that was a tough way to lose a game. He just makes one of them. Just needs to make one of them.
Yeah, I think that those are the kind of things that build character. I know people don't want to hear that stuff a lot of times, but they do. And you talk about you'd rather it happen in November than happen in March. I mean, so when you go down the line, you can think back to that. And if he's put in that situation again, I'd be willing to bet he's not going to make just one of them. He's going to make both of them. He's going to be thinking about that for a long time. Those things build character, and this kid's going to be a good player. You could see it, and I think they're in a good spot. Okay, we are just about going to wrap up the show here today. Dunk, final thoughts. Again, we're going to give our predictions on Monday's live show, 9:15 on Monday. wherever you get your podcast as well. You and I will both be in the Dome as well on Monday night. Just final thoughts on where the Saints are or wherever you want to take it.
Well, let me throw something, a little curveball at you.
Okay.
As a horse racing guy, I'm fired up. This is Breeders' Cup weekend.
Yeah.
And I would encourage, if you're not a big horse racing fan, but you're just kind of a casual sports fan, everyone's going to have their eyes locked on LSU, Alabama. But if you get a chance, turn on the Breeders' Cup for the Classic on Saturday, because there's a horse called Flightline running that literally, in the sport of horse racing, this is one of the generational talents that we've ever seen in the sport. I mean, we're talking about a horse that might be American Pharoah Secretariat-like. And he's going to be running in the Classic for $2 million. I just say, as a casual sports fan, if you're interested in seeing greatness, turn that thing on for 2 minutes and watch that horse run, because it's going to be pretty special.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, because I don't have it, and I'm not a horse racing guy, but I believe that Caesars now has its live horse racing app. You can go and bet horse racing on your phone now, just like you bet any other sport, which I was waiting for it to come, and it's here. So I may take Dunk's tip, and I may go put a little something on.
Well, you're not going to get great odds. It's probably going to be 1-9, but
1-9. Wow!
Just to watch this horse run, I mean, Tom Amos always talks about, the great trainer here from New Orleans, always talks about the athleticism of the athletes that he trains. He goes, it's no different than human athletes. He said, when you watch this horse run, he just skips across the dirt. I mean, he's not hitting the ground hard. It's like when you see Lamar Jackson run. It looks like it's effortless. That's the way this horse runs, is the way American Pharoah ran as well.
By the way, you and I, we failed to touch on it, but the biggest college football game of the year, I think, so far, you and I both like Georgia to cover -8. And part of the reason for me, you mentioned it in your column, is that everybody and their grandma is on Tennessee this week, and Vegas doesn't lose like that. I mean, there's a reason why this line is what it is, and you and I were talking off the air. When it comes down to Kirby Smart, Georgia's been kind of lying in the weeds a little bit, waiting for this game, and I think they're going to have something for Mr. Hooker on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, the defense he hasn't faced a defense like that all year. Alabama's not up to the Alabama standards of defense. And look, they played most of their big games at home. I know they played. I pointed this out in my column. I know they went to Baton Rouge and won. That was a day game, and it was a fluke. I mean, they got a fumble on the opening kickoff. They had a big, long punt return. They got control of that game early, kind of took the crowd out of the game. That ain't going to be the case between the hedges. This thing's going to be a dang, a bloodbath down there. I mean, and so I think they're going to give them everything they want. I love Georgia in this game. I think it's one of those rare occasions where you get, kind of a convergence of events that leads to an out of whack line. Yeah. And I think lay the points.
I think lay the points, and I certainly like the under.
Yes.
It's not. I don't usually like to lay 8 and take the under, but I think this is a case where that's what we're going to have. I think you're talking about 27-14 or 20, somewhere along those lines. Tennessee's only going to score 14 points. Yeah, I think Tennessee's. This isn't going to be your regular Tennessee game. I know their offense has been outstanding, and Hendon Hooker has been incredible. And he may win he may go on and win the Heisman. I don't know, but this is not going to be his game. That being said, look, Tennessee's going to fight and claw, because they know even if they lose this game, as long as they can keep it close, they're still going to have an excellent chance to get in the playoff. If they get blown out, maybe not so much. So we'll be watching to see what happens there, because we all know that the SEC championship game, whoever wins this game is going to be in the SEC championship game. My final thought is, again, it's going to be this is one of those weekends you look forward to, for sure. And we're going to have fun with it. LSU-Bama, Tulane, Tulsa, Saints on Monday night, Tennessee, Georgia, a full plethora of NFL games on Saturday. And the thing I like is when the Saints aren't on, you can actually sit back, watch the red zone, and just see what's going on, Dunk. You don't have to worry about what the Saints are doing.
No, it's a great weekend for sports in our market. And look, the Saints can kind of get back in this thing. We could be looking at a really epic football season, with Tulane, how they're going in the American Athletic. They have a chance to make a New Year's Day bowl game for the first time in a long time. And then LSU's surprising success. If they were to somehow pull off the upset and stun Alabama, they're in the driver's seat in the West. So this has turned into a very compelling season. I think very surprising for a lot of local fans, that maybe had lower expectations when the season started.
Dennis Allen won't have to worry about too many critics, at least for a little while, if they can find a way to win this game. I mean, all the people and me as of late, to be honest, who have been on his case, no one's going to be on his case if they win this game and get to 4-5, because I think Atlanta is going to lose to the Chargers. I think the Bucs will beat the Rams, and I think if the Saints win, I think there'll be a 3-way tie atop the NFC South. And wouldn't that be fun? I mean, just going down the stretch. So.
One thing I've always said about this run that the Saints have been on since even back to when Haslett was here, and people like to bang around Jim Haslett. That was when I started covering the team. But the Saints have been relevant for a long time. They've had one bad season. That was Katrina's season. You have to throw that one out. That was extraordinary circumstances. Otherwise, they haven't had a 4-12. They haven't played hardly any games where there's not something on the line.
Not since Ditka left. Not in a century.
And that just doesn't happen, JD. You do not take that for granted. And so I think that's the charge right now. Just get back in the mix and have relevant games where you got something on the line to play for. I think the Saints have a chance to do that.
Well, let's have fun with it, and let's talk again on Monday and see how we feel. Again, giving our predictions, and we welcome everyone back, and they can give their comments and questions. We'll see you on Monday, Dunk.
All right, see you later. Talk to you, JD.
Peace and love, my friends. We'll talk to you on Monday morning, 9:15. We thank you for joining us on Dattitude. See ya.